What is it, Bannister?
I'm very sorry, but we must know downstairs who is in charge of the house now.
Well,
Why must things change?
for a very good reason. That is,
You are quite right, Bannister. Things have changed. Mrs. Forte is the head of the household now. Well, in a way, I suppose Mrs. Forte will give the orders from now on.
Hello, welcome to a very special bonus episode of the official Gilded Age podcast. I'm Alicia Malone from Turner Classic Movies, and joining me one more time is Tom Meyers from the Bowery Boys podcast. Hi, Tom.
Hello, Alicia. Oh, man, can you believe it? Here we are at the end of the season. We made it through, all 8 episodes on the official Gilded Age podcast, talking about the TV show, but we couldn't stop. So we thought that we would do one more bonus episode to sort of stand back and talk about the season as a whole, and talk about what moments we love the most, which new characters we love the most, what made us laugh, what made us cry repeatedly. This is, instead of Ward McAllister's, Society, as I have found it, this is The Gilded Age, Season 3, as we have found it.
I love that. And we have some new interviews to share as well. We're going to be chatting with one cast member who had a very big season, Kelli O'Hara, who plays Aurora Fane, as well as 2 behind-the-scenes experts, choreographer John Carrafa and medical consultant Dr. Stanley Burns. Well, so much happened this season, it's hard to know where to start. So why don't we begin with using our favorite word, journey, and talk about the big journeys the existing characters had. I mean, Gladys became a duchess, Aurora was forced into a divorce, Jack became a wealthy inventor, Ada stepped up as the head of the household. What else? What am I missing?
Let's see. Oscar found his softer side. At least briefly. Maud Beaton showed up again. I think we're allowed to call her Maud, or Dolly Trent. Bertha took over Mrs. Astor's ball. Mrs. Winterton became a widow. Ward McAllister was pushed out of society. We got to go to the Haymarket. I mean, a lot happened.
So much drama and so many journeys. But before we get to our favorites, actually, I'd love for us to just give an overview of the themes from season 3. What would you say were the biggest themes this season?
Well, here on the podcast, I feel like we kept coming back to a couple key sort of central themes. And at the top of that list would be, of course, love and marriage, right? Mm-hmm. Who gets to marry for love? Who gets pushed into marriage because of outside sort of strategic purposes? I mean, there were multiple marriage proposals in this season alone, and there was one whopper of a wedding.
Yes, there was. And we also saw the other side of marriage, which is divorce. The theme of divorce was established from the very first episode with Aurora's husband Charles demanding a divorce, but there was also Charlotte Drayton, and also some existing marriages were beginning to look a little shaky.
I think you might be talking about George and Bertha there. Yeah, things got a little bit dicey between the two of them, which brings up another theme that was really explored, which is ambition. And as we talked about in our last episode, episode 8, we saw in Mrs. Kirkland's character and in Bertha's character, 2 very ambitious women who had big ambitions for their own children, and whose own children actually ended up turning against them over the course of the season.
Yeah, Bertha and Mrs. Kirkland. There was also the theme of progressive causes. We went to temperance meetings and suffrage meetings, and we witnessed a talk given by Peggy in Newport about fighting for Black rights.
Mm-hmm, yes, and we saw a parallel Black elite for the first time that really did exist in Newport at the time, and, which has been so underrepresented in popular culture. I don't think we've ever seen this before. We got to see a Black baseball game and go to a Black society ball.
And also the theme of trust was very important this season, and honesty. And we definitely saw that play out between Larry and Larian.
And of course, who's in charge, Alicia? Who is in charge here? That was the name of episode 1 of season 3. And honestly, I feel like that expression could be applied to this entire season. Who was in charge?
Absolutely. I still don't know. Okay, so those are some of the major themes. But now let me ask you, what would be your pick for most intriguing character journey of this season?
Well, instinctively, I want to say Ward McAllister because he gets pushed out of society, but I'm going to keep it positive here since we're wrapping things up and go with Aunt Ada. Season 3 really explored her journey coming into that position of power, right? And assuming the new responsibilities and taking charge and eventually sitting at the very head of the table. What about you?
I'm going to choose Jack because, as we've talked about on this podcast, he is the embodiment of the American dream. But what I found especially interesting about his storyline was that it showed both the pros and the cons of that dream, of achieving your dreams. You know, now he's a wealthy man. He doesn't have to work as a footman anymore. But wealth wasn't actually his goal, and he liked his job. And now he's at a loss of what to do with his time. And he had to move out as well.
I've never had a home before this one. Not a real home.
Then this must be our secret. Not forever, but for now.
Oh, that was a sad moment. But it turns around for him, but we'll get to that in just 1 second.
Okay, next I want to talk about our favorite hidden historical tidbits. So not the major plot lines, but those blink and you'll miss it nods to history. You know, those little nuggets that felt like they were purposely included for you, Tom, just to track down and figure out, like the song I Dream of Jeannie with the light brown hair.
Oh, I know what you're getting at. Yeah. And now I've got I Dream of Jeannie with the light brown hair stuck again in my head.
Again.
I was singing that. I think I sung it a couple times on the episode.
Yeah, I think you sang it to one of our interview guests too.
Yes. So no, that was fun. But I have to say, I love how much history the writers and the producers put in and the directors put into this show. It's just these little nods. I mean, in that case, musical direction there's, as we have said before, I feel like every line counts in terms of something, little nugget that I couldn't get out of a rabbit hole. I think it was this Italian opera exchange that happens. Remember the dinner that Bertha has to throw to impress Mr. Merrick, and George is sitting there, and there's a weird flirtation between Mr. Merrick and Bertha. But they briefly just kind of talk about last season's Italian season at the Metropolitan Opera, which really did happen. The first season was all in Italian. Even operas that were not written, librettos that were not written in Italian were translated into Italian. And this was a whole debate within the opera-going public about whether all opera should be sung in Italian or whether or not it should be sung in German if it was written in German. So this is a whole thing. They get into it just briefly in like 2 sentences there, and it was a blink and you miss it. And then later, actually, Oscar brings up the subject again, really to Mrs. Fish, to Mamie, when they are outside during an intermission at the Metropolitan Opera. So it's a subject that is again dabbled in front of us, and I'm just going to take the bait. So I loved it. What about you?
Well, I really liked the moment where Gladys stood up for herself against Lady Sarah, because that was a reconstruction of a real moment that happened with Consuelo Vanderbilt. And the scene in the show is quite similar to how Consuelo describes it in her memoir. There was a dinner with the real Sarah and Consuelo where Consuelo asked Sarah if she was feeling ill.
Sarah? Are you quite well?
Why shouldn't I be?
I thought, when you stood without waiting for me, you must be ill. I'm so glad if I was wrong.
Also, Tom, on the subject of history, were there other historical tidbits that we just didn't get time to explore in this podcast?
Well, I think the one real life story that we really didn't get into on the podcast because it doesn't fit neatly in with the TV show is Alva Vanderbilt's own divorce that happened before Consuelo's wedding. But even more importantly, we did talk about that on the podcast, but we didn't talk about the fact that just a couple months after Consuelo's wedding in January of 1896, that's 2 months later, Alva remarried, and she remarried Oliver Belmont, another, heir to a fortune with fabulous places in Newport. So she retained her place in society, but it was something that everybody was talking about. It was, she was breaking new ground here. So there's this whole other story happening of her own scandalous wedding that took place like minutes after her daughter's, and they couldn't even find somebody to officiate. I mean, they ended up getting the mayor of New York City to do the job. Although, to be fair to Bertha, we do see her get kind of flirty with other men in this season. For example, Mr. Delancey.
I only wish you knew how much more interesting you are than the Duke of Buckingham.
And there were a few storylines that we just didn't get a chance to talk about in this podcast. The one that springs to mind for me is Mrs. Bruce and Borden. He proposed to her, but then she had to say no because it's revealed that she is already married. Despite this, Borden is still in love with her, maybe even more so because he hears how she's continued to look after her ill husband.
I think that I would have liked to have spent a little bit more time really examining Arthur's backstory. We did talk with Dr. Dunbar about that, but there's some real fascinating and very rich material there. In season 3, we learned more about his own journey. It would be fascinating to explore that further, and especially because he's notable in that he's really one of the only characters we see sort of take on Agnes in the show, right? And sort of bring up to her face her own privilege and really kind of hint at her own prejudice. So I think that Arthur is just a fantastic character who opens up a lot that needs to be discussed. But I want to turn to Agnes now for a second. We love Agnes's zingers. We have throughout seasons 1 and 2, and season 3 is no exception. She's just got such funny lines, and Christine Baranski gives perfect delivery. Did you have any particular favorite Agnesisms this season?
My favorite Agnesism was her line just before the temperance meeting in episode 1, where she said, "Let the sober circus begin." And that was a line that we actually said to Christine Baranski, and she said it with us, and that brought me a lot of joy. What about you?
That was a moment. Yes. When Agnes is talking about her falling, diminishing place in society, where she says that maybe, as she laments to her sister Ada,
Well, perhaps I will find my place in Newport with Aurora, and I'll spend the rest of my days with society's cast-offs and women of ill repute. At least they'll have wine.
it's all about that little beat that she took at the end before the zinger and Ada's eye roll. It was very, very funny.
It was perfect. I did watch that scene a few times just to see that interaction between them, which actually brings me to my next category, which is most rewatchable moment. You know, what was the moment that you found yourself rewinding and watching over and over again? I think for many of our listeners, it was probably Aurora Fane saying, "And to think, I've bedecked myself in these gewgaws."
You know, we should really ask Kelli about that line.
Yeah.
When we talk to her. Very, very funny. Yes. I also rewatched the scene where Larry proposes to Marion underneath a perfect canopy of trees. And after our interview with Harry, we found out that they shot that entire scene on a sort of Lazy Susan, a spinning stage. And I found that so fascinating that I hadn't noticed that when watching it the first time. So you really do have to go back and, you know, now you'll never not be able to notice that they are turning. The background is turning during the entire proposal. Well, this season on the show, we have done more interviews than ever, as anybody who's been listening or watching the show knows. There have actually been 21 interviews in which 24 people have been interviewed. It has just been such a pleasure to talk to all of the creative talent that produced the Gilded Age and to get that up close insider backstage knowledge of how they made it all happen. But of course, that is a lot of material to work into our episodes. So unfortunately, some really choice bits ended up on the cutting room floor. So now is our chance actually to put some of those bits back into this show.
I love that. So what would be your choice of clip from an interview that we didn't play? Something that ended up being cut. What are you picking?
I'm going to select a clip from our interview with visual effects supervisor Douglas Perver. Let's listen. You said having more people, duplicating people or replicating them in the church. Did you talk to us about that before in previous seasons, like at the Academy of Music shots or the Metropolitan Opera House?
Absolutely, yeah. The crowd duplication is such a huge part of our work whenever we're doing big scenes like that, because it's just impractical to get 1,000 people in costume, makeup, all of that stuff. So yeah, the Opera House was another big crowd duplication moment last season, the Academy of Music the season before. This season, we've also done it a lot in the baseball game, which is also in episode 5, where we were shooting out on Long Island again in a park, and we just did not have enough people, and all the reference that we looked at saw these lines of people all the way around the field. It was not like the stadiums that we're all used to kind of seeing with the seating. It was more of a park outing. So people are lined along the field, and then there's picnics happening and people sitting in their carriages and all that kind of stuff. So we had to create a ton of people. I think we were supposed to have 200 people that day, but I think only 70 something showed up, and it was a bit of a scramble on the day, but we knew that what we had filmed, and then if I was able to film additional elements on our backlot of people in the proper costume, we'd be able to create that crowd later. And so that's what we did with our talented in-house team of artists. We kind of took that scene in-house and just plugged away at it for the schedule of that episode.
That was a really fun interview. And, you know, one fascinating tidbit that we didn't get to include in our interview with costume designer Kasha Walika Mamone was about the design of the bridesmaids' dresses at Gladys's wedding. And so here she is telling us why they were white.
You know, it was also a very interesting discovery from research when we realized that a lot of the times bridesmaids wore white, which was kind of surprising because that's not very common in our contemporary understanding of bridesmaids. All the bridesmaids were identical. I remember the first shock of everybody is realizing that they are going to be wearing white because they look like bridesmaids. And when Marion walked down in her dress, she looks like a bridesmaid. But then the discovery happens that all of them are in identical dresses.
We were so lucky with our guests this season, and we have new interviews coming up after the break. But before we get to that, I just want to have one more topic, which is further reading and watching. Because, you know, if you're not ready to say goodbye to the Gilded Age just yet, and you want to explore more in your, dare I say, journey with this period of time in America, we have some books and some movies to recommend. So, Tom, do you want to start with some books about the Gilded Age that you would recommend for our listeners?
Absolutely. I have 6 right off the top of my head that we have used throughout this entire season. The number 1 choice is The Glitter and the Gold, The American Duchess in Her Own Words by Consuelo Vanderbilt Balson. This is the actual source material, folks. This is Consuelo's own memoir of her life, and she goes into great detail about her engagement and then the wedding and then what happens afterwards, which we won't talk about now because who knows what's going to happen on the show. The second, closely related, is the book Consuelo and Alva Vanderbilt, The Story of a Daughter and a Mother in the Gilded Age by Amanda Mackenzie Stewart. I think that this is important because she kind of tells the rest of the story, right? She uses Consuelo's memoir, but then she also digs through other archives and uses newspapers to tell the whole story, including bits of the story that Consuelo didn't want to get into. So that's another important one to read. Third up would be Society as I Have Found It by Ward McAllister, the book that really did come out and really did partially lead to his downfall in society. It's really kind of fascinating sometimes and tedious at others, but it's important in understanding, you know, the bigger picture here. Another great memoir is King Lear and the Gilded Age by Elizabeth Drexel Lear. This is another bit of source material that most people, when they're writing Gilded Age history books, use because she was friends with Alva. She was friends with Caroline Astor. She was right there And she was also stuck in a terrible marriage that she felt like she couldn't get out of. So she takes you inside the balls and the different places. A much more modern book is Greg King's book, A Season of Splendor, The Court of Mrs. Astor in Gilded Age, New York, which is just like the textbook about Gilded Age history in New York City. I refer to it often. It's a wonderful, super engaging read that I think anybody would enjoy. And finally, Carla Peterson's book, Black Gotham, A Family History of African Americans in 19th Century New York City. We have used Black Gotham here on the show for the past 3 seasons. It is a fascinating read, often underrepresented, really important, and I'm so glad that it is used as source material in the Gilded Age. So those are my 6 books. What about your movie list, Alicia Malone?
I have several, but I'll try to keep it brief. The first is quite obvious, Age of Innocence. You could go classic and watch the 1934 version if you like, or you could watch the 1993 version directed by Martin Scorsese. This is based on a book by Edith Wharton, who was part of the New York society during the Gilded Age. So she used a lot of her personal experiences as inspiration for her books. And I just love the fact that Martin Scorsese, who was very known for his gangster films, found correlations between the gangster world and the world of the Gilded Age society, saying that they both had to live by a strict moral code, and if you didn't comply with that code, you would be killed, or in Gilded Age case, ostracized from society. To go with that, another recommendation based on another Edith Wharton book is The House of Mirth. This was filmed several times, but I choose the version from 2000 starring Julianne Moore. And this really shows just how detrimental it could be as a woman to be cast out of society. A different take on the Gilded Age is The Magnificent Ambersons from 1942, directed by Orson Welles. This is not set in New York, it's set in the Midwest, but it does show the kind of rapid changes that were happening during this time in America. In the podcast, we mentioned director Joan Micklin Silver, who directed Crossing Delancey. She also directed a film called Hester Street in 1975, and this stars Carol Kane, and it shows the immigrant story during the Gilded Age, about a Russian family coming to America during that period of time. And then finally, there are 2 versions of a Henry James novel. That novel is Washington Square. You could watch The Heiress from 1949, which is my favorite version, directed by William Wyler, or Washington Square from 1997. But this shows the story of a wealthy woman who's pursued by a fortune hunter who, Tom, is not unlike our favorite Oscar. Very similar. So those are some recommendations. I could go on, but that'll get you started.
Well, Alicia Malone, you could do this for a living.
I should think about that, shouldn't I?
I have to say, it's been a blast doing this show with you. The past 3 months we've been on this.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed talking to you. I always learn from you, Tom, but we're not going to say goodbye just yet because we're just going to go to a break. And then when we return, we have more fresh interviews with Kelli O'Hara, choreographer John Carrafa, and medical consultant Dr. Stanley Burns. Back soon.
I think if Mrs. Russell means to challenge convention, we should take her part.
One evening at the head of the table and you're ready to change the world.
You do have a dress, don't you?
I've got the dress. I'm just not sure I've got the nerve.
Mrs. Russell is making such an effort for you.
But she can't control the looks I'll get when I enter the ballroom.
We shall all enter the ballroom together.
What?
If Aurora can be brave enough, then so can we all.
And Aurora can be brave enough. Welcome back to the official Gilded Age podcast bonus episode. I'm Tom Meyers, joined by my friend Alicia Malone.
Hello. And you mentioned Aurora Fane, and we realized during this season that one person we haven't talked to that we really wanted to was Kelli O'Hara, the amazing actress who plays Aurora Fane. So we got that chance. Here she is, Kelli O'Hara.
Well, Kelli O'Hara, it is so nice to have you on the official Gilded Age podcast. Welcome to the show.
I'm so excited to be here. Absolutely.
You are, of course, no stranger to the Broadway stage, to the Metropolitan Opera, to television. Can you tell us what the Gilded Age and what the role of Aurora Fane brings to you or means to you?
Sure. I love playing Aurora Fane. I think the Gilded Age is one of the greater gifts I've been given in this long journey of a career. It's just, there's so many of my friends, so many of my heroes. I'm in a room with them. Yes, Aurora serves a lot of tea and and says there's lots of niceties, but at the same time, I gain so much from doing it. I really do. I really enjoy it. I love the team there. They've brought together a great group, crew, cast, creatives, everything, and it's just been really a positive experience in my journey.
And journey is exactly the word that we've been using throughout this season, because there have been so many journeys that several of the characters go on, but especially Aurora. And, when you compare her character's arc and storyline in seasons 1 and 2 to 3, I mean, this season, there was just so much more. Can you talk about that journey that Aurora's been on in season 3?
Yeah, I had a very nice conversation with Julian just after season 1. And we were talking about sort of what direction Aurora would go in. But he talked about this idea of wanting to highlight the difficulty, especially for women in this era of choice. And here we are again, but let's not get into that. But the difficulty of choice, and that the fact that it wouldn't even be your idea or your wish to be divorced, and yet you're the person who has to do the divorcing. Aurora was kind of, she is the picture of someone trying to do everything right, but also there was just a tiny bit of her that was curious about the other side. I always felt like I was crossing the street when people didn't quite know it, and I love that about her. And I was very pleased when he said, and I think it's going to be Aurora who tells this story for us. And there were things historically, factually going on that have to do with divorce. Aurora's one version of it, and then there's another version of it, and we have to see how it affects different people's lives. And so I was very happy. I was very happy to have the storyline. Now, Kelli, I talked to Sonia Warfield a lot about this. It's like, can't I, punch him in the face, or can I, and you're talking about this woman in the late 1800s. You can't think like a 2024, this is at the time we had this conversation, woman. You have to really tell the story in order for the impact to be made. And so I want to show the devastation of what it would have done to a woman at no fault of her own. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
It's been heartbreaking to see her go through this, and Charles was so cruel to her as well. So I'm curious what your conversations with Ward Horton were like in doing these scenes together.
Well, first off, you have to understand that Ward is the kindest man that ever lived. I mean, he is just the sweetest sweetheart. And we were very excited to have sort of some juicy scenes, but I think he hated playing this. He hated having to do this with no reasoning in his, it's just he met someone else, period. You don't really get to choose all the whys. But I think that it's been hard for him because it's a very evil type of thing to play. And I think his just stillness really made it so, lack of empathy, lack of regret. And that's exactly what we need to say, poor Aurora. So, but just so you know, Ward Horton, he's not comfortable with any of this.
And there have been, as you said, every season so far has brought up and sort of surfaced some of these stories that get, that are overlooked, right, in the normal curriculum in the schools. And speaking of Newport, I noted when I was thinking about Aurora's journey this season that Aurora showed up for Peggy's lecture in Newport. So Aurora is also, she has a progressive streak to her, doesn't she?
Kelli has very specific thoughts about Aurora. However, when I talk to the director or anybody they're like, no, just play it like you don't. But I think that it's more interesting, that progressive streak, that one that goes over to the Russell house when, the Van Ryns would not appreciate that in season 1 and in season 2. Going to the new opera house meetings, hosting Oscar Wilde, involving myself in Oscar Van Ryn's love life. I feel like that's who I think Aurora is, and it makes me very proud. Now, she's in a time where all of that's hidden and she's not using a loud voice about it. But I love her because of that. I love her because she wants to know more and educate herself more and evolve. And when I saw the script, that I go to this talk that Danae gives, not only did I get to hang out with Felicia Rashad and Brian Swiss Mitchell and Audrey McDonald and Danae all day, not only that, but I was also just thrilled that of all the characters in the show, Aurora showed up for that. I feel like there must be an underlying idea that she is more open, more curious than some.
But you do have the audience on your side, right? I mean, you know that the viewers love Aurora Fane. And I'm thinking of Bertha Russell, who, you know, it seems that we're seeing a new side of Bertha as well as she comes over to support you.
Yeah, you know, I think about it this way. I obviously we've seen someone like Bertha be able to be strong in a way that we women today hope and think that we want to be, right? That we are. And I think that even though we're telling a period story, you can have that character that represents a bit more of what was probably actually going on then too. Mm. And so I think as an actor, as much as I'd like to say, you know, F off, you know, I deserve better than this. And because that's what I'd want to say in real life, I have to play the part I'm playing in an ensemble, you know, and the more you feel for Aurora, the happier and grateful you are to our leading lady, Bertha Russell, in our show. And because we've seen what she did to her daughter, we really need her to have that side of her needs to come out that is just and fair and strong and something that we can hold on to. So I see what my job is, that catalyst for someone to come in and save the day. And selfishly, I'd want it to be myself. And creatively, I'm happy to play the part I can for her.
You're bringing up all of these cast members, so many of whom are also amazing Broadway performers and singers like yourself, operatic singers in your case. Who do we have to talk to get a Broadway, like at least one musical number, you know, at some point in some season here?
I know, you know, it's when we were you know, kind of presenting the new opera house idea, and there was the one scene with the opera singer. I'm like, I want to get up there and do the aria, you know, that kind of thing. I think that I'll be honest. I think that would be so much fun to get this cast together and have some sort of, you know, Carnegie Hall night where we come out in our whole get up and do some sort of big thing. I think, however, on the show and within these storylines, I think it gives most of us great pride that we're doing dramatic acting without, you know, breaking into song. There is a thing where, you know, if you're in musical theater, and obviously you have Christine Baranski and Cynthia Nixon and Nathan, you know, you have all of these really fantastic singers, but proven dramatic actors. But I think for the rest of us who probably have lived quite a bit of time going, I'm not just a musical theater singer, you know, I'm not just a singer. It is a nice thing to just tell the story as the character of Aurora. And I think, you know, something that would be more interesting to me is Aurora goes to some saloon and she's a really bad singer. I'd like to play that. That would be
sing
fun.
off key.
You know, because it's the it's the acting that is the fun part. It's the being what you don't do that's the fun part about being an actor.
One moment that viewers especially loved this season, which I'm sure you heard about, was when you said very convincingly and heartbreakingly, bedecked myself in these gewgaws, which made me think that that's an advantage of having a theater actor. You know, you have to do Shakespeare or opera and really sell what you're saying, even if it's not in your native vocabulary, with the emotion. Would you say that's correct?
Absolutely. So the gewgaws, it's so funny. I have never had such a response about anything. In fact, just someone yesterday said, oh, don't wrinkle those gewgaws if you're going to sit next to, you know, whatever, because I was wearing a dress.
Yeah, I didn't even notice it because you played it so well. It just sounded so natural coming out of your mouth.
How strange. When I bedecked myself in these gewgaws, I was looking forward to your coming home. Little did I know.
Well, I do play a lot of period things. I mean, I had to say inamorata and gigas in the same scene. So that was both of those. First of all, I was like, what in the heck's an inamorata, first of all? And then gigas and gigus was also a version of that was in the script. I had to look those up, especially in an emotional scene like that. But I guess you don't. Yeah, you can't make fun of anything. You have to mean it, right?
When you just said gigas, I heard Aurora Fane's voice there for a second.
Yes.
Can you talk about finding that voice? Like, we're hearing Kelli right now, which sounds like Aurora's cousin, maybe, but where's the voice?
I feel like probably because I'm from the South, by the way, and so I lost this a long time ago, but I don't know why. But I think when I went to art school and then acting school, somewhere along the way, and Christine Baranski, having been from I think she's from Rochester or something, she completely I think built or has a different accent, the way she speaks. She told me one time. I've never tried to speak a certain way. I probably just wanted to speak sort of in the middle somewhere, so that you can then go get a British accent for. But I don't make myself. This is how I speak. I never tried to lose my Southern accent, because when I drink or I'm tired, it definitely comes out. Or if my my dad calls me on the phone, it's right there. But I think that Aurora is only a tiny bit more mid-Atlantic. I never wanted it to sound artificial or fake or too grand, and because you don't want to go British. I think some people they get so mid-Atlantic that all of a sudden they're saying, I can't go, and you're like, ugh. So I didn't want it to be that way. I wanted it to be sort of benign, but also, she's upper class, and it's fun. But I do think there's a balance there. I've only heard a couple of times, we have a dialect coach, and he's always trying to get me to open my, Marion. I would never say Marion. I'd say Marion, and so it's little tiny tweaks like that. But it is my voice, I think. But she's just a little bit more proper. She just talks like that a little bit, and she's more soft spoken because she's trying to be polite, and I'm not like that.
Kelli, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to meet you.
You too. Thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Kelli O'Hara, just as delightful as you would imagine her to be. She was great.
She was. Well, we're not done yet, because we also had a chance to go behind the scenes of that opening scene of episode 8, the emergency medical procedure on George Russell. In fact, we sat with a medical consultant and ophthalmologist, Dr. Stanley Burns, to talk about how he worked with the team.
Well, Dr. Burns, it's such a pleasure to meet you, and you are so fascinating. Both Tom and I went down a rabbit hole reading all about you, because in addition to being an ophthalmologist and a research professor, you also have the world's largest collection of early medical and historical photography. So can you tell us a bit about your collection?
I've always been a historian since childhood, and when photography became available in the 1970s, as soon as I found that out, I sold my other collections, which were historic arms and quite valuable. So I was able, within a couple of years, acquire thousands of really great photographs. And my collection really is focused. So I was only interested in photographs that other people did not have. In other words, I wanted the one-of-a-kind images. And so for that, I collected daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, tintypes, and then, of course, photograph albums, which are specific slices of history that were kept by an individual or institution.
Wow. Yeah, you're a curator, historian, professor, doctor, and also an author, and also a medical consultant for television, because in addition to working on the Nick, you also advised on the surgery scene with George Russell at the beginning of episode 8 for the Gilded Age. What kind of research is involved when you are consulting on a scene like that? Do you use any of your photographs?
Well, I not only use my photographs, also my book collection. In the 1970s, 80s, 90s, if you wanted to write extensively about a topic, you had to go to the library, stay at Xerox machines. So at Xerox, but you must remember that I was a practicing ophthalmologist. So I did 8 hours of ophthalmology work a day and then 8 hours of historical work a day. And that's been my life ever since. So I acquired the book collection, and we're talking about 5,000 volumes of historic medical books, so I could just go up to my library. And so that's how I did my research. I would look up a book, for instance, on obstetrics. I'd have the books on obstetrics from 1790 up until the mid-1970s.
Wow.
And that's how I did all my topics. So I just stayed at home and worked. Because my office and my practice and my collection was in one place, I could work at all hours of the day. There was no transit time, just going up or down stairs.
So take us into this episode, or the final episode of season 3 of The Gilded Age, where George Russell has been shot and he has rushed back to his own home to be operated on, for the bullet to be removed from his body. In what capacity then were you consulted, and what did you do to how did you find information that would be relevant to this scene?
Well, first of all, I've been writing about that scene for 48 years.
Wow.
In a way, because Civil War wounded soldiers were my initial topic, and I've written a book on it, and I have the original collection of Civil War wounded soldiers and how they were operated on. So I had the pictures of surgery. In the photographs, what's very interesting, when you write something up, you do not write up the fine details. You don't tell them what color shirt you wore today or what your background is. To where you are, I mean, your curtains, the color of your walls. But when you have the photographs of the period, you can see what people are dressed, how they were dressed, their demeanor, the demeanor of the people around them, and exactly what they were doing. So photography supplemented the written word by supplying detailed information you would never get from a book. And so you can only find that out from a photograph. So all the books in the world do not help you write it helps you write a detailed history, but it doesn't help you show a detailed history. And that was the distinction of my collection, that I could show it because I had the visual images. And so for that scene with George, when the inspector was shot, I've done that history many, many times. The idea of the show, it's in the perfect years. It's 1884, 1885, and that's when surgery began to change. The problem is that in that era, just as you said, the doctors wanted to take the bullet out. But in those days, they usually stuck fingers in, and the washing or unwashing of hands was dictated by the hubris of the doctors. Doctors were still using unwashed hands. And this was just at the time, 1884, 85, when aseptic surgery was being developed, which was the idea to clean everything. But so at the time, it depended upon the doctor who saw the patient. And of course, doing it at home, going to a hospital was not on the top of anyone's list in that era.
Oh, so that was not just for discretion, because we were speculating that perhaps he was not raced to the hospital because he wanted to keep it out of the papers. But this sounds like it would not have been really unusual for him to go directly home.
He would go directly at home. 10 years later, he would go to a hospital because there wasn't anything special for emergency surgery at that time. So yes, he would be treated at home, and you'd get enough people there in order to be able to perform the surgery. Now, a few years later, when they had asepsis technique rather than antiseptic technique is really using chemicals, carbolic acid, and solutions like that to dip your instruments in, to wash your hands, to dip your wound dressings in. Just a few years later, it was sterilization that counted. You had to sterilize your instruments by boiling them. You had to have heat sterilization of dressings. So then you would have brought them to a hospital. But in this era, you could do your surgery at home, which was often preferred because when you went to the hospital, you had to worry about spreading and the contagiousness of infections. So that was the right thing.
We saw George having some laudanum, or however you say it, and that was a type of opium, right? Which I imagine was very addictive.
Yes. Well, the number one drug addict of the late 19th century were Civil War wounded soldiers. Obviously, they had to pay for their wounds. The number two was middle-class women, because you could go to your drugstore and get all of the opium that you wanted.
In this scene, we also see the Russell's family doctor, Dr. Logan, come in a little bit late to the scene. Dr. Kirkland has already performed the operation, but he's surprised to see that there's a Black doctor there. I have read about your incredible collection of African-American photographs. Could you tell us about that, and also about the photographs you have of medical professionals?
I'd like to show you one picture, if I can, and it's of an African-American. You can see that he's the lead person in this picture.
The doctor is African-American.
Yes. And so when you have something like this was not, by the way, in America. This was also at the turn of the century. I have another one I'll show you. And there's no doubt that he is the lead surgeon.
This is photographic evidence of African-American doctors being in positions.
Yeah, being the boss in the operating room, being the boss of the examining the patient and showing the pathology. And so this is all the evidence you need. All the words, I could write it. You wouldn't believe it if you were, lived in Georgia or Louisiana or Alabama in 1900, that the lead doctor was an African-American physician. And this was one of the, this was the main direction, as you know, we took in doing the Nick. But the fact that we had the evidence that African-Americans, physicians, surgeons in Europe could attain an important place in medical culture.
And when you see the photos, it really drives this home in a way that, as you say, reading it doesn't quite do it justice. Do you feel the same way when it comes to television, being able to show this stuff on television that people might not know about in terms of early medical history?
No. We think visually. And so if you see it on television, it's believable.
Yeah.
Because that's what stays in your mind. And so that's why in the Nick and in the Gilded Age, I tried as accurately as possible to put the visual memory in the right perspective. And it was with the insult of the white doctor coming in to see a Black doctor doing medical work on 60th Street and Fifth Avenue. Very difficult, but really interesting to show.
I have to just ask, in this scene, we see this emergency operation, like we said, on the dining room table, and it becomes a kind of all hands on deck moment, right? Where we have the neighbors showing up, we have the staff that's around helping hold him down. Would that have been true? Like you said, it was just anybody around who would pitch in to help out the surgeon in a moment like this?
Yes, this was not the time of aseptic surgery. This was all hands on board. They needed someone to hold someone down to make sure that they wouldn't move. Even when they did anesthesia, sometimes they would do anesthesia lightly so that you wouldn't feel pain, but that you would still feel things so that you would move around. So holding someone down was really a common aspect of surgical procedures at the time, unless you had full anesthesia. And I think it was chloroform anesthesia that was quick, which took about 9 minutes, but ether was about 17 to 20 minutes.
Oh.
So you have to put that time frame in, you have to know how to use it, and you have to know how not to kill the person from the anesthesia.
Well, we're certainly happy that Dr. Kirkland pulled off this surgery with George Russell, and I think it's likely with a bit of your help. Dr. Burns. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Stanley Burns, on the official Gilded Age podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Wow, just a fascinating conversation. I think we could have spoken to him for hours.
Yes, he's such an accomplished man. He's published 51 books and apparently only sleeps 4 hours a night, which makes sense because where else would you find the time to do all that work? But now, Tom, we have another fascinating interview with a key behind-the-scenes figure who worked prominently on the finale episode of the show. Here is choreographer John Carrafa.
John, it is so great to meet you because you have been doing this series. You've been the series choreographer on the Gilded Age for all 3 seasons. We are so happy to finally have you on the show.
Thank you so much. It's just lovely to meet you two after hearing you for 3 seasons.
It's been fun to watch your work. I mean, at the end of season 1, right, at Bertha's Big Ball, we got to see the quadrille that you choreographed as well.
That's right. And you also got to see me play Mr. Vaughn, the dance teacher for
Really?
Gladys. And yeah, you know, the previous episode, they show them practicing, and I say,
remember, everyone, the quadrille is not a romping dance.
Right.
That's right.
and that leads me into like what you might find interesting about this which was there was a dance teacher and a sort of a dancing master named Alan Dodworth, whose school Gladys would have gone to, and that's where they would have sent all of their young pre-ingenues to go learn the proper etiquette, not just dance, but also which side does a man stand on a lady when he takes her arm? How do people ask one to dance at a ballroom? So many great lines about the man shouldn't face the woman directly because of the potential for bad breath, and and mostly
still holds true today.
Yeah, mostly things about how not to be overly zealous or indelicate when you dance. Mostly about the same things that you know about all the other etiquette in the show. Everything was proper.
And so this was all written down? You were reading these instructions? Because that brings up the question of just how do we know today, how do you know in 2025 what people were dancing like in 1884?
Exactly. That's the first question everybody asks. And of course, there's no video or recordings of any kind. So, what's really interesting is Gladys would have gone to this school and the young people would have gone to this school to learn. The wealthy would have gone to this school to learn. But, of course, the lower classes wouldn't have been able to go. So Alan Dodworth and another guy, I think his name is Hardgrave, wrote books that were disseminated around the country to show people like this is how you behave. So of course people would aspire to be like the upper classes, read the books, and the books were very detailed, specific instructions about how to where to place your feet, how to hold each other. And that leads you to, we'll get into the other community and their dancing, but that's another way that the Black community would have learned these dances. Anybody could get the book.
I'm thinking about the fact that on this show, there are so many, obviously, Broadway actors, including a lot of people who dance. So does that make your job as choreographer a little bit easier?
It's interesting because every show I do, there's this clear delineation between the stage actors and the film and TV actors. And sometimes the film and TV actors are pretty good. The stage actors are always good. Kelli O'Hara and Donna Murphy have both done Shall We Dance in The King and I. So they know a good waltz. Nathan Lane, those guys are, used to learning dancing, but other, film actors aren't necessarily asked to do that. They might be really good at it, but often it's a new skill for them to learn.
Absolutely. Well, I was reading an interview with you where you were saying actually you don't want the dancing to always be perfect. So sometimes actors can be nervous about dancing, or sometimes they can be really good dancers, but you like to add in moments of imperfection to kind of make it feel more real. Is that right?
Yeah. It's interesting because when I do something set in the present, it's really all about individual expression. And I often tell people, go look at any wedding party everybody isn't doing the same thing. You know, you might have some guy doing disco to Radiohead, or, you know, anything goes, because it's really all very personal and very expressive and very free. This world is all about showing that you belong in this society, and it's exactly the opposite of that. It's about adherence to the rules and the conduct and the manner in which a person behaves in this class of society. Unlike a lot of shows where I'm asking people make fun of the dancing or take liberties as if you're doing something you feel like you shouldn't do, so they don't look like they're doing something a choreographer gave them to do. In this instance, it's really about being as specific as possible. But what's ironic about that is, even when people are trying to do the exact same choreography, they will have their own style. So even though I'm teaching people to be really precise about the kind of waltz they do, and the waltz in this era is a bizarre form of dancing. It's not like everybody's like, that's the waltz. You can't tell on camera, but the footwork of it is very unusual, and it's very specific for a reason, which I'll tell you about. But even though everyone is doing the exact same movements, they've been taught the exact same thing, people will have really their own style in it. So I don't have to do the thing that, Alicia, that I usually do, which is to try to find people's personalities. It's why I like to work with actors so much, because dancers are trying to be good, trying to do it a certain way, trying to be technically correct. Actors are being themselves. You know, they can't help it on camera.
Do you also think about their individual characters when you're choreographing? Do you talk to them about how their character would dance?
I'm teaching them the dancing as if I'm Alan Dodworth, actually, and letting them, the key for me in this show is to get them free enough so they can act at the same time they can dance. And sometimes they have to talk while they're dancing. The Duke and Gladys have some dialogue while they're dancing. It's really hard for these tricky dances that they've just learned to be able to act and have emotion. Sometimes you don't need to, but they should look like this is in their bones. That, you know, they should look like this is something they grew up knowing, and on top of that technique, they can do a scene. The tricky thing, the reason that the waltz is so tricky is because it's built so that the woman never moves backwards. Because if you think about it, their dresses drag on the ground. They have trains. If they step backward, they're going to step on their train. And so the woman, the way the steps are created, everybody's going forward as they dance. Nobody, you know, if you think of your classic Viennese waltz, there's like this swooping back and forth and swooping around. This, if you look at it, and you know who does it, really nails it. If you look at Danae and the first man, Raymond Baynard, who asks her to dance, when they begin, it's like, they nailed it. Like, that's the perfect 1884 waltz. This is what's really interesting about it, because when we started this, I was so excited about the whole idea of the black ball. I'm like, oh my God, I have never seen that on camera before. And I would say, I said to Sally, like, I've never seen that. She's like, it exists. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I've never seen that depicted ever in television. Like, I've done a lot of different kinds of things. Black. And everything led us to the fact that it was going to be the same, that people were going to be doing the same dance, because they were all emulating Europe, right? They were all emulating the fashion and the customs and the manners of Europe. So it was stunning to me, because I had imagined we were going to be cutting back between these two very different things. And so to differentiate it, you know, the thing that we really got clear about, or the thing that was most important to me in talking about the dance, was that, you know, the society, it showed that you belonged when you did these things properly. The Black community had even more of a reason to be vigilant about really obeying the rules and showing that we freaking belong. We are part of this world. And they were tough on each other, if people, even tougher, if people were not following the proper decorum, the manners. The difference that for myself, when I was working with them, and we talked a lot about this with the dancers, is that it was even a tad more reserved and a tad more stately and a tad more proper. And and if you look at it more than once, you'll see like, oh yeah, they're just being, and I let the white ball be a little looser, and you'll see like they actually are getting more into like the waltz of the 1890s and, the Viennese waltz, the later waltz, and took liberties. They're having a blast. They're, and the black community is just like, we are the cream of the crop, So that was, for me, that was the most interesting part of this whole thing, that they were going to be the same.
And I know you also think about the dance scenes as being storytelling devices, right? Like a way to push the story forward. So what did you think about in terms of Peggy's Ball and the story that the dance was telling?
Sometimes you have the research and sometimes you want to capture the elements of the era. What I built was something between a quadrille and a waltz. And so it has the patterns of a quadrille. You're just like, oh, they're doing these interesting patterns because, the quadrilles were waltzes that would have patterns like a quadrille. So it made a nod to, if you look at them, they're doing these like little flower pattern, interesting patterns, like, oh, well, they're not all doing the same thing. They're not all just waltzing. What's going on? There's an outer circle and there's an inner circle. And
almost like a kaleidoscope.
Yeah.
It's really pretty.
Yeah.
In terms of like where, of course, as I'm watching it, I'm thinking that you're also shooting Bertha's Ball at the same time, but of course you're not.
Right. A month before. So that was in December. And then in January we shot Black Ball, but we had a huge bank of storyboards because the idea was, how are we going to cut back and forth between the two balls? And Sally had a really specific idea of like, we would go off of this dress onto that dress, and some of it's still in the cut, and some of it she decided to do in a different way once they actually cut it together. But we were spending a lot of time at one ball thinking about how we were going to cut into the other ball, and I was thinking about how is this pattern going to turn into that pattern, and just a subtle difference between the two.
And how do you keep the energy up on the set? I mean, in the final scene, it needs to look like it's all full energy, and it's the first time anybody's done anything.
I love these dancers so much, and I'm glad you asked that because I wanted to talk about the dancers a little bit. What you might know if you're a very astute watcher of the Gilded Age is it's the exact same dancers every time we do any dance scene. And it's to the point where they've created characters for themselves. They know who they are. I actually wrote down some of the names because I think I asked them, it's like, what are some of your character names? They're just so great.
So they
these
came
guys.
up with them themselves?
Yeah. Oh, names, backstories. The White Ball, some of the names are Norman Gresty. That's Alex Norden. May Worthington. Susanna Vivian Kensington. They have elaborate backstories for themselves. And then the Black Ball, they were so excited about the history, because we give them a history packet, the dancers, when we do this, just so they can really know it. And the black dancers just embrace this whole idea, and we're so excited about it from the beginning.
Yeah, well, you do a wonderful job. So, John, thank you so much for joining us. It was really interesting, fascinating.
Wow, what a fun conversation and a nice way to wrap up the season here, talking to John about the dedication on behalf of the dancers and performers, and how they, so many of them have come up with personas to help them get into the mood. They are also like loving the history of this show.
Yeah, it's so hard not to. And Tom, we can't belabor this anymore. Unfortunately, that is the end of our podcast for season 3, at least.
Say it ain't so.
I know. I was trying to drag it out for as long as we could, but we can't. And, I have to say that if you watch the podcast or you listen, you will see or hear Tom or myself. But Tom, there are so many people who made this podcast happen.
That's absolutely right. We have a whole team at HBO Podcasts and a team at Pod People who have made this happen every week. And we've been working on the show for months. So thank you to that whole wonderful team of people. We are like a family at this point. And I think we're both going to miss everybody. It's been a wonderful journey, Alicia Malone.
It has been a wonderful journey. We'll have to just do Zooms where we can just pretend that we're talking about the show. And we also want to thank all of you who have listened to this podcast or watched the podcast. I know, Tom, you've gotten a lot of feedback from listeners who have really enjoyed the show and the podcast this season.
I have. I've gotten wonderful emails from people. I've gotten even stopped a couple times on the street from people who are listening and who want to talk about it. But it has made a real impression to me of just seeing the dedication of the viewers of the show. And I think that that speaks to, obviously, the show itself and the incredibly talented artists who put together the show, from the head writers all the way down, and all of the actors and all of the artists behind the scenes working on sets and makeup and costumes. You know, I think making the show is really wonderful because we get to know a little bit more about what goes into the show and really appreciate it.
Yes.
And appreciate their level of artistry. So thank you to the creators as well of this wonderful TV show.
The show has been really supportive of this podcast as well. And okay, that's it. We have to say goodbye. So thank you so much for joining us this season. Thank you, Tom. It has been a real pleasure.
And thank you, Alicia Malone. It's been a wonderful pleasure working with you as well, and even talking about the Gilded Age off camera. Just on our own. We can't stop. So thank you for your artistry as well.
Of course. And thank you. And we will be back next season. Woohoo! With more Gilded Age. Thanks for listening. Bye.
This has been the official Gilded Age podcast, written, hosted, and produced by Alicia Malone and me, Tom Meyers.
The podcast is a production of HBO in collaboration with Pod People.
For Pod People, our supervising producer is Rebecca Chasson, associate producer Sam Gabauer, and our video editor is Susana Vasquez. Special thanks to Hannah Pedersen and Amy Machado.
For HBO Podcasts, our executive producer is Michael Gluckstadt, and associate producer is Aaron Kelly.